Welcome to the Introduction to ArcLogistics Route web workshop. My name is Carl Terry and I'll be presenting the topic for you. I've been associated with the ArcLogistics Route product for 5 years and I'm the product manager here at ESRI. The topics that we'll be covering are, first of all, what is ArcLogistics Route? This will be followed by setting up ArcLogistics Route, then we'll cover what is an order, and finally a brief introduction to routing. Each topic will be followed by a topic demonstration where you can watch as I set up the appropriate component in ArcLogistics Route, and finally I'll create a set of 8 routes for a beer distribution company. The web workshop is designed to provide an introduction to the capabilities of ArcLogistics Route and to guide the user through the setup process. It is not designed to replace on-site training, but rather to supplement that on-site training. First of all, let's briefly discuss what is ArcLogistics Route. ArcLogistics Route is a route optimization software program that routes multiple vehicles simultaneously while honoring complex user business rules. These business rules model the real-world conditions of routing vehicles, such as vehicle capacities, vehicle costs, committed delivery time windows, start and end of day times, the time required to render service to a customer, required lunch breaks, and pre-allocated stops to customers. ArcLogistics Route offers users great efficiencies, lower operating costs, and greater customer service. Some organizations reduce the number of vehicles in the operating fleet, and some reduce the amount of overtime while maintaining their committed delivery times. Let's now take a quick look at the application and see how easy it is to create 8 routes for 121 orders once ArcLogistics Route has been set up. Firstly, you'll notice there's a familiar Windows look and feel to the program with many pull-down menus, toolbar buttons, and Windows right-click type functionality. In this demonstration, ArcLogistics Route has been set up with locations, vehicles, and orders, and I'll just route them. When I'm ready to route an ArcLogistics Route, I click on the Build Routes button. While it's processing, let's take a quick look at the interface. The far left side is known as the tree view. This is the main repository of data. This is where we'll set up the most of the variables such as vehicles and locations in ArcLogistics Route. To the immediate right of this view is the list view. The list view is a tabular view of routing information, showing it in a familiar table type format. The map view is to the right of the list view and shows the same information from the list view but in a spatial context. This allows the user to see the geographic spread and positions of the information. Finally, at the bottom of the screen is the time view, which shows the user a temporal or time perspective on that same information. You can see that ArcLogistics Route has finished processing the routes and has created a routing solution for us. We'll examine this process and solution in greater detail as we move through the workshop. Now that we've seen what ArcLogistics Route can do, we need to discuss how to set up ArcLogistics Route. ArcLogistics Route needs to be set up correctly in order to generate efficient routes. The setup is designed to allow you to model your real-world situation, and you should try to use realistic values. To start off with, we'll look at setting up the street data. This will be followed by examining locations, and then one of the most important variables to set up, which is vehicles. Street data is an important component in any good vehicle routing program, and it's the first component that you need to set up in ArcLogistics Route. It allows the program to generate and display the routes. ArcLogistics Route uses the actual street data to optimize the routes and will give you a significantly better result than Euclidean distance or as the crow flies routing program. Street data files can get very large, so it's important not to use more street data than you actually need to use. Large street data files can slow performance when routing, especially if you have a large number of orders and vehicles in the routing problem. In the USA, the with data version of ArcLogistics Route comes with GDT street data on 3 highly compressed CDs. You extract or uncompress the desired area of street data to be used. During this process, ArcLogistics Route will suggest some default speed limits for the 4 major classifications of streets. Please note that many users here actually lower the default speeds on the local roads while leaving the freeways as they are. Let's now take a look at what is required to set up the street network in ArcLogistics Route when using the with data version and GDT street data. When the application starts, you'll be prompted to either set up the street data or to use the tutorial. Let's choose the Set up a service area option and start setting up the street data. We select Continue. Then we're prompted to type in a name for the new street dataset. We'll call this Web Workshop. Select Next. Now we browse to the drive where the CD is. ArcLogistics loads the street data, and we're prompted to select a folder to store the street data in. Next, we specify the center point for the map set. We're given two options, to either enter an address or to point to it with our cursor. I'm going to enter an address. I'm using 380 New York Street in Redlands, California 92373. It then shows us the map with our center point. The default is a 20-mile radius. Most people will actually use a much larger radius towards the 100-mile end. I'm going to decrease this for the purpose of the demonstration down to 5 miles so we can speed up the extraction process. I select Next, and I'm now displayed the default speed limits for the street classifications. I'm going to change the primary and secondary streets to 25 miles an hour and the local streets to 15 miles an hour. This is because in reality trucks actually traverse those street segments much slower than the default speed because of stop signs and turns. I select Next, and ArcLogistics says very quickly check for the amount of disk space required to store that data on. In this case, it's only 12 megabytes. In reality, on a large street data set, it could be approaching 2 gigabytes. I now select Finish. What it's doing is that it's cutting out all the streets, it's eliminating the disconnected streets, checking the travel time on all the classifications of streets, and will create a shapefile that ArcLogistics Route can actually route on. When you have a large street data area, the actual time to uncompress this can be quite long, several hours. However, in a short street data set like this one, it's only taking a few minutes. It now prompts me and tells me that the street data setup is complete and we're ready to start routing. Now that we have a street set to work with, locations need to be set up. You need to create a minimum of one location during setup, and you must create it before any vehicles. Locations are directly related to vehicles as the start and end points for routes, and are typically points like an office, warehouse, distribution center, things like that. You can have many locations in ArcLogistics Route, and a routing problem can have vehicles starting and ending at those various locations. The locations can also be used as seed locations. A seed location is when a location is created on the map and a vehicle is associated to that point. When ArcLogistics Route builds the routes, it will favor and tend to assign stops in that area to the vehicle that uses the location as its seed point. However, it's not a hard rule, and it does depend on many other variables. It's more like a tendency for a vehicle to be routed into a certain area. A renewal location is a location where a driver can either reload or unload product mid-route when the vehicle capacities are either reached or depleted. For example, if you were using ArcLogistics Route for solid waste pickup and were using the capacity information, ArcLogistics Route will optimize the most suitable time and location to visit the landfill to either renew or unload before continuing on the route. Locations have hours of operations too, and it's important to complete some of these. If a location is open at say 6 a.m., vehicles can only start their day after the location's open time. Likewise, if the user says that the location closes at 6 p.m., ArcLogistics Route will attempt to complete all routes before 6 p.m. It's important to geocode the locations correctly, as these are the start and end points of the vehicles, and they need to be as accurate as possible to model the real-world conditions. Geocoding is simply the process of assigning an X and Y coordinate to the street address, typically by searching the street database and finding the appropriate street segment and interpolating the position within the street segment that the address is. Once we've set up a location or several locations, the next step is to set up some vehicles. There are many variables for vehicles, and they help to define how the routes will look and behave. Vehicles can have unique characteristics, or they can all have the exact same characteristics, enabling the user to model the real-world situation. Many companies have heterogeneous fleets, meaning that their vehicles have different capacities and costs associated with them. This is one of the powerful features of ArcLogistics Route, enabling you to accurately model the fleet. All vehicles have capacities and costs. Capacities are represented using three separate fields, and are generically called weight, volume, and custom. They're all numeric fields and can represent anything the user wants, such as revenue, weight, cubic feet, cases of beer, pallets, case equivalent, kegs, whatever you want. Capacities are hard constraints, which means that ArcLogistics Route will not allow the program or the user to allocate more material to a vehicle than it's been set up to take. Maximum orders is also a hard constraint and is a limiting rule restricting the number of orders or stops that a vehicle can handle. Costs are related to the operating cost of the vehicle. Typically, users set a cost per hour, which is the operating cost of the driver, basically the wage. Cost per hour of overtime is the overtime cost to operate the vehicle and must equal or be greater than the cost per hour. Cost per mile is the operating cost per mile driven. You should try to set accurate costs for vehicles, as a powerful management tool in ArcLogistics Route is the ability to quickly assess the costs and viability of routes in the interface and in the reports. Specialties is another vehicle characteristic and is a pre-allocation of an order to a vehicle. This is a hard rule, which means that an order with a specialty can only be handled by a vehicle with the same specialty. For example, bulk beer is typically handled by a dedicated type of vehicle, and in the solid waste industry, white goods are also handled by a dedicated vehicle. Specialties could relate to a driver's skills, such as being licensed to carry hazardous materials, or to a vehicle characteristic such as a liftgate. Workday rules are important in defining the routes as well. Start times can be expressed as a range or as a fixed start time such as 6 a.m. Maximum travel length is the maximum amount of drive time for a vehicle, and maximum total length is the maximum length of the workday for a vehicle, basically the time that a driver and vehicle are accruing costs. Time before overtime is simply defining when the overtime will start, and lunch is an optional setting along with how long lunch is. Finally, vehicles require that they have a defined start and end location from the locations information that we just talked about. Along with these start and end locations, you need to set up how long the vehicle is there accruing costs without driving. This is usually when the driver is accruing costs while they check the manifest vehicle, the vehicle load, things like that. You can set it to 0, but most users allocate a small amount of time. Vehicles can also be allocated with a seed location or a renewal location, as discussed earlier. Let's now create a location so you can see just how easy it is to do, and then I'll create some vehicles. The first thing I'll do is create a location. Select the Add Edit Locations button on the toolbar. This will open the Location Properties dialog box. Now select New. I'm going to name my location Depot. Now I need to fill in an address. We'll use the Redlands address again. .380 New York Street, Redlands, California, 92373. I'll tab through the geocode button so that ArcLogistics can find it, and I'll leave my hours of operation open right now. Now I'll save and I'll close the location. If I now select on the locations icon, I can see that I've created my new location, which is now highlighted in the map in light blue. Once we have at least one location created, we can create vehicles. The reason locations must be created first is because we need to link the vehicles to the locations as that start and end point. Let's now create a vehicle. I select the Add Edit Vehicles button from the toolbar, and it'll open the Vehicle Properties dialog. I select New. I'm going to call this vehicle SD25. Driver is Rich. I now move down to the capacity fields. I'll set the volume capacity for this vehicle at 750, the weight at 40,000 pounds. I'll leave the custom field blank. I'm going to restrict this vehicle to making at most 15 stops per day. Over in the cost field, I already have this populated with 50 cents per mile, $16 per hour, and an overtime charge at $24. I'm going to add a specialty to this vehicle of SD. The reason I've chosen SD is because the demonstration is for a beer distributor. SD will symbolize a side load vehicle which has bays in the side for delivering cases of beer. Now I select the Workday tab. I currently have this set for an earlier start time of 7 a.m. and the latest start time at 8 a.m. I'm going to change this to 6 a.m. with the latest start time of 7 a.m. ArcLogistics Route will optimize the best start time between 6 and 7 a.m. My maximum travel length I'm going to limit to 6 hours of driving. My total length I want to put down to 9 hours. I want overtime to start after 8.5 hours. I'm going to give the person 30 minutes for lunch, and I want that to start after about 4 hours. Now I move over to the location section. Remember, we just set up a location called depot. I'm going to assign this vehicle to start at the depot, and the driver is there for 20 minutes before he actually takes the vehicle off the lot. So he's accruing that cost for 20 minutes. That's the cost per hour. I also want the vehicle to end at the same location, and once again, I'm going to give him 20 minutes at the end of the day where the driver's accruing costs but the vehicle has returned. I've now set up the vehicle, so I select Save and Close. If I check my vehicles in the vehicle icon, you can now see the vehicle that I just created, SD25 with the driver of Rich. Down in the time view, we can see the driver's available start time is between 6 and 7 a.m. Now we've created a vehicle and we're ready to move forward. Let's take a quick look at what we've covered so far. ArcLogistics Route is a powerful route optimization software program designed to route multiple vehicles simultaneously while considering business rules. The program needs to have several components set up before routing can take place though. First, you need to have a street data set for both routing and display of the routes. This should be set up with realistic speeds associated to the various classifications of streets. Only set up as much street data as you need, as those files can get pretty large. Second, you need to set up locations, which help to define the routes by allocating the start and endpoints to them. And third, you must set up the vehicles and the associated business rules with them, rules such as capacities, costs, operating rules, and times. These are important in generating realistic routes. If we have a map set, a locations, and some vehicles set up, all we have left to do is some routing. So let's now examine an order and talk about routing. An order is an item of work that needs to be routed. It could be a pickup or a delivery, an inspection, a meter reread, an installation of something, a repair, a service call. Could be any number of things. Orders have many fields, of which some are for routing parameters and some are for customer detail and reference. Most organizations import orders from an external file. The process is simple and I'll demonstrate it in a few minutes. ArcLogistics Route can import a file from just about any ODBC compliant database file such as Access, Text, CSV, DBF, Excel, FoxPro. I just mentioned routing parameters, so now let's talk briefly about that. Routing parameters directly affect the routing solution and are a component of the algorithm that solves the routing problem. Routing parameters include items such as capacities, that weight, volume, and custom field that we just saw in the vehicle properties. Routing parameters also include the service time, which is the time it takes to complete the work. Time windows, that's the available time to arrive at an order, and specialties, which we also saw in the vehicle properties. So you can pretty easily see how closely linked the orders in the vehicles are by having so many common fields. We need to briefly cover geocoding preferences. You remember that geocoding is simply the process of assigning an X and Y coordinate to a street address, typically by searching the street database and finding the appropriate street segment, and then interpolating the position within the street segment that the address actually is. ArcLogistics Route will geocode all addresses, whether they're for locations or orders. When orders are imported, they're automatically geocoded during the process. To decide whether an address matches the information in the street dataset, ArcLogistics Route uses a set of rules, and you can alter the parameters that are used when those rules are applied. Geocoding preferences is where you set these rules. The way you set the geocoding preferences will dictate how accurate the geocodes are. In most circumstances, users require very accurate geocodes to the street level segment of accuracy. There are several fallback options available, which should be considered when setting up ArcLogistics Route, as poor geocoding can lead to inefficient routes and frustration. The primary geocoding field is the actual X and Y coordinate if available. If not, then ArcLogistics Route will geocode to the street address. Now let's examine the geocoding preferences and then see the process for importing some orders, and finally we'll look at an order and examine its properties. First, let's check the geocoding preferences. This is found up on the File drop-down menu towards the bottom. Select Geocoding Preferences. The geocoding preferences is set so that anything that scores above 60% is currently a match. Anything below 60% is currently set to geocode to a fallback position. You can see this on the vertical scale. As I lower the fallback option, you can see the scale change in the ranges below. The way I'm going to set it up now is that anything above 60% is an automatic geocode, and anything below 60% I'm going to leave ungeocoded. I'm also going to turn off the fallback options by unselecting postal code, alternate XY, and cross street. Most users typically want to geocode everything as accurately as possible, and geocoding to a zip code fallback or a zip code centroid is generally not accurate enough for routing. If we look at the top of the screen on the geocode priority, you'll see that the primary geocoding mechanism is the import XY. So if you do have those coordinates, we can import those and it will geocode automatically. Secondly, it will geocode to the street address as we mentioned. Now that I've changed the geocoding preferences, I select OK, and the geocoding preferences dialog closes. Let's step through the import order process. Firstly, I'll create a new routing folder and I'll call it Web Workshop. I'll select Finish. ArcLogistics has automatically populated that with all the vehicles that I particularly want for this demonstration. Now I'm moving up to select the Order Import button. This will open up a wizard. I'm going to create a new Order Import profile. I select Next. I'm going to populate the Web Workshop routing folder I just created. I select Next. I'll use the data file directly. And I browse to where that file is. In this case, it's a text file called beverage.txt. I select Next. I'm using the table name of beverage.txt. And now I come to the field mapping section of the order import wizard. This is very important. On the left-hand side is the source. These are the column headers from the source data. To the right of that, under the field heading, is what's allowable within ArcLogistics. And I map these across by click and drag. So I'm dragging order number to order number, customer number to customer number, name, address, city, state, and a postal code. I have the XY coordinates, so I wish to use those because they will override the street address. I have time window information. This is my time window start, my time window finish. I'm only going to use one time window for this demonstration. Time at delivery is the service time. Total weight I have volume information. I do not have custom information, so I'll leave that out. I have description. I'm using my comments field, and I'm also using the specialty field. I now validate that everything is correct. They're in the right columns. Quite often you'll have more data than you actually need to map across. I select Next. I'm going to add all the orders. I select Next and I save the order import profile name. I'll call this Workshop 2 and I select Finish. ArcLogistics now imports those 121 orders and geocodes them using the XY coordinates. You can see them now populated on the map. If I select the unassigned orders, I can select any order from here and look at it. Let's now look at one of these orders. At the top, we have fields for name and customer number. We have a name of Usave Liquor. Customer number hasn't been used in this case. We have the street address below that. Below that to the left we have the geocode status. This was geocoded using the import XY feature. The fallback in this case would have been the street address. We have some volume information of 46. We have a weight field of 1,428. Custom field is blank, and we have 25 minutes for our service time. Remember that service time is the time from when the vehicle pulls up to do the delivery to when the vehicle takes off again. We have time window information here. The earliest arrival time is 7 a.m. and the latest arrival time is 11:30 a.m. We have a specialty on this order of SD, which means it has to be delivered by a side load vehicle. And then towards the bottom we have several more text fields: order number, description, comments, and 2 phone number fields. Now that we've got ArcLogistics set up for routing, we're ready to route. You can see we've got locations set up, our depot. We have vehicles set up. We have a routing folder set up with orders in it ready for routing. Everything's now been set up and we're ready to create some routes. The actual routing will only be briefly discussed here. It's easy to spend a good full 2 days with an instructor on site fine-tuning the routes and teaching all sorts of shortcuts and advanced skills. The more accurate the setup of what we've covered so far, the streets, the locations, vehicles, and order fields, the better and more realistic the routing solutions will be. You should note, though, that the more constraints you use, such as capacities and time windows, the more likely it is that routes will cross each other. Also remember that you can force certain orders to be on a specific route by using specialties. This could be because a driver is familiar with an area or a customer has a requirement to be seen by a certain driver. It's possible that with a really good setup, the user will let ArcLogistics route complete the routing and all they have to do is validate the results. Many users do make a few adjustments afterwards to the routes, though. In these cases, the user is allowing ArcLogistics route to optimize the routes and to do about 95% of the work. However, it's also possible to manually create routes by selecting orders and assigning them to individual routes and only allowing ArcLogistics route to sequence the orders on that particular route. This is a simple process and we'll see this in the next demo. Let's now take a quick look at routing. You'll remember that we have a street data set up, we have location set up, in this case we're using our depot location. We have vehicles set up, 8 of them, we have 2 bulk routes and 6 side load routes. We have a routing folder set up called Web Workshop, and we have 121 unassigned orders. These orders have time windows, capacity information, and a lot of other routing parameters in there. Let's take a look at some of these. As we scroll across to the right, we can see the first time window information. We can see the service time here, volume information, and weight information. We also have a specialties field completed, SD for side load and BB for bulk. So we've got some quite complex user business rules in here. Let's now route this. I go up to the Build Routes button and I select Build Routes. The first thing ArcLogistics does when it builds routes is create an origin destination matrix behind the scenes, which is basically a big table of time and distance from each point to each point. Once it's created this table, it can then do the routing while trying to honor all the complex business rules, those specialties, the time windows, the vehicle restrictions, the capacities, all those work rules. When we've now been presented with a solution, let's have a quick look at this and examine the map view first of all. So we can see our map view, we have routes that are crossing over each other. If I turn off the 2 bulk routes, we're just looking at the side load routes. And based on the time window information and the capacity information, that could be quite good. If I toggle this now, I'm just going to look at the 2 bulk routes, and those 2 bulk routes look quite good as well. If I examine the time view, I change the scale, so I'm looking at a 12-hour day. I can see the actual hours of operation of all the vehicles. If I select one of the routes now and look in the list view, I can see the estimated time of arrival for each stop. I can drag columns to the left to make it more user-friendly for me, and I can resize these columns to present more data. I'll tile these again. ArcLogistics has now presented us with one solution. What I'm going to do now is duplicate the routing solution that we have so that we can manually create some routes. So I select the routing folder name. I've now duplicated that. It's called Copy of Web Workshop. First thing I'll do is unassign everything by selecting the Unassign button. What I want to do now is select everything in the far east and we'll manually assign those to route SD1. ArcLogistics has now sequenced those stops on that particular route. I now take the stops to the south and I'm going to try and put those onto route SD2. It should give me a violation message. It's giving me a message now that at least one of those stops has the BB specialty for bulk, and I'm trying to put it onto an SD vehicle for the side load. However, I do want to route as many of those as possible. So ArcLogistics takes those and puts them on the route. I'm now going to try and drag and drop 11 stops in this one small cluster and put them on that same vehicle, the blue one, SD2. It's now giving me a capacity warning telling me that I'm requiring 14,140 units, but I've only got 9,858 available. It's also giving me a conflict for the specialty. There's at least one stop in there with a BB specialty, that bulk again. I'm going to route as many of those as possible. So you can see how easy it is to click and drag stops from one route to another. I can click and drag this bottom order, and I'm going to put it onto route SD6 Jake. And you should have seen then that the miles column was populated with something. Let's try that again. I'll unassign it quickly. I'm going to drag this stop here onto the Jake route, and you'll see this field in miles become populated with the distance. So in order to do that, he's driving 35.7 miles. Let's now go back to the Web Workshop routing folder, and we'll look at some of the management tools available. What ArcLogistics is showing us now is the total information for the day's worth of routes. We have our 8 routes with the driver's name, how many stops they're doing, total miles they'll be driving, the total cost, the total volume, and the total weight for those particular routes. You should now be able to see that there's several ways to use ArcLogistics route to either completely optimize the solution, you can manually create solutions, or you can use a combination of optimization and then manual fine-tuning of the routes. Let's review this final section on orders. Orders are items of work that need to be routed. They could be deliveries, pickups, installations, inspections, any number of things. They contain many fields for capacity information that are similar to those in vehicles, plus time window information and service time information. Orders are usually imported from a database and upon import are geocoded. The geocoding preferences dialog is where you set the geocoding rules that ArcLogistics route uses. Once everything has been set up correctly, routing should be an easy operation. You can add ArcLogistics route optimize the routes, manually create routes, or utilize a combination of both ArcLogistics optimization with some manual editing. In order to complete the exercise that follows the presentation, you'll need either an evaluation copy of ArcLogistics route or the complete product. You can order an evaluation CD from the main ArcLogistics webpage at the URL shown on the screen. The ArcLogistics route webpage also contains some useful references for on-site training and integration. Please remember that this small introduction to ArcLogistics route web workshop is not a replacement for on-site training. In addition, if you have any questions either now or in the future, please feel free to contact myself directly. And finally, thank you for participating in the ArcLogistics route web workshop.